We've got the first 9th edition rules for the Imperial Guard coming out today. Warhammer Community have just shown off some really quite nice rules for Cadians, in particular their Conscripts. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're talking new guard rules. These ones coming from that Warzone Octarius book this weekend that they kind of hinted would have a Cadian supplement in it earlier in the week. Today they've confirmed that that's basically the case, and this does seem like a bit of a tied over book for Guard until they get their new codex in 9th, whenever that might be. And apparently in the book we'll have a supplement for the Cadian shock troops, crusade rules for the Astra Militarum, and I guess they potentially might do the same thing that they're doing for the Tyranids and rolling in their Psychic Awakening content in the same publication. It might mean that we see a reprint of the Militarum Tempestus regiments, the tank aces, and the other stratagems from that Psychic Awakening book. Obviously it's not as exciting as a codex, and as I've said before I don't think it's the best way to deliver supplemental content, but it's still kind of exciting to see some new rules that the Guard are getting, a faction that are absolutely desperately in need of some buffs in 40k at the moment. They kind of struggle to compete with some of the other 8th edition codexes, never mind the 9th edition ones. So like the previous supplements, it does sound like the Cadians will be getting something fairly standard issue, probably 3 new Warlord traits, 3 or 4 new relics, and then 1 page of stratagems. Warhammer Community have shown off 2 stratagems, 1 relic and 1 Warlord trait today, so we'll take a look at each of them. I'd say perhaps the single most interesting one out of the book is this new White Shield stratagem, which is basically there to represent Cadian's raised conscripts, who have a fair bit of effort put into their training compared with other ones throughout the galaxy, and now you can pay a command point or 2 to represent the better conscripts in game. To use it, you basically have to have a Cadian Warlord, and you choose a Cadian detachment that has some conscripts in it, paying 1 to 3 command points for it, basically 1 command point for every couple of conscript squads. I think usually I probably wouldn't be taking more than 2 conscript squads in a unit. I think they're really quite nice for screening, but they don't really do much damage hitting on 5s, and 1 command point doesn't seem bad to upgrade to fairly meaty units like this. The conscript squads in that detachment gain the White Shield's keyword, get a leadership characteristic of 6, and most importantly lose their Raw Recruits ability. Currently we don't know if the White Shield's keyword is going to do anything else other than this stratagem. I'm going to guess if they're bothering to add a keyword to it, then hopefully it would allow them to interact with something like another relic or a Warlord trait, though I guess it could just be for fluff purposes. For me the leadership really isn't that big a deal either. Normally conscripts are leadership 4, so they would basically have a good chance of failing a morale test whenever they lose a model. At leadership 6, at least if they only lost 1 or 2 models, they usually wouldn't run too easily. Though to be honest, if you're taking a really big conscript squad, I think there's every chance that you'd be losing considerably more than 1 or 2 per turn. I guess it's a nice to have, but not the reason that I want to upgrade them. The really good bit, I think, is losing that Raw Recruit special rule, which is the one that makes their orders really quite unreliable, only going off on a 4+ rather than automatically. I think this is really quite a big deal, as orders can be really efficient on conscripts, but having the unreliability means that you can barely ever rely on them for your battle plan. I would say that the biggest deal of this by far is that you can basically guarantee them to get a move order off, and have those conscripts flooding into the centre of the board, gumming up the midfield objectives, or potentially move blocking the enemy army. With essentially 2 movements and 2 advances, you're going to be on average moving around about 19 inches. If you start a conscript squad on the front line, they could easily be pinning the enemy right back into their deployment zone, or just pile so many bodies onto an objective that it might be almost impossible for the enemy to clear them off it and get the movement to get on it, just due to being physically move blocked by those conscripts. I think at 5 points a model that's potentially all they need to do to justify their inclusion. Obviously they're not exactly going to be doing much damage that way, but then that isn't really the point. I guess for a flurry of damage you could potentially get first rank fire, second rank fire off on them. Hitting on 5s, they're still not going to be the most amazing marksman ever or damage output, but I guess if the stars align with a big unit of 30 of them, all getting within 12-inch range of an enemy light infantry squad, you will be blazing away with 120 shots for an average of 40 hits. That could easily be enough to clear something light, maybe some Eldar infantry perhaps. Overall I think this is really quite fun, gives a new lease of life to conscripts, and I really think that a unit or 2 could be a competitive choice in a Cadian force, just due to that guaranteed great movement and putting a whole load of cheap bodies on objectives. The next stratagem I also think is really quite a nice one. Cadia stands for 1 command point, and quite a fun and fluffy one as well. The planet broke before the Guard did. This is basically quite a nice defensive stratagem that you can use in any phase, so shooting or assault, and it gives you 2 durability buffs, basically unmodified wound rolls of 1 or 2 always fail regardless of any other abilities, and if the attack has a damage characteristic of 1, you can add 1 to any armor saving throw made against that attack. I think both of those bits are useful. Not being wounded on 2s is quite good for toughness 3 guardsmen, where anything strength 6 or above will normally wound them on 2s, and the damage characteristic of 1 thing is pretty handy as well. Most of the time damage 2 and above things just aren't really going to be that efficient at clearing guardsmen, so getting a pop-up save against damage 1 weapons is very nice indeed. I guess it might be best if you can use both effects. Maybe if you were targeted by something like an assault cannon perhaps. It could be very efficient on bigger squads such as combined infantry squads or conscripts. And I quite like the way that you can use it in any phase, not just in the shooting phase, as with take cover. As far as I can tell, if you're targeted by damage 1 weapons, then you could potentially have the benefit of this, take cover, the other 1 command point stratagem, psychic barrier from an astropath, and also getting light cover as well. Just in theory, if you are layering literally every defensive buff on one set of guardsmen, you could have a standard guardsman or conscript with a 1+ save, at least against damage 1 attacks. Having multiple sources of stacking armor saves certainly seems to be working out for the AdMech quite well at the moment. Guards certainly don't have anywhere near the damage output, but nice to be able to have some concentrated durability where you need it. Sounds like it could be a real pain to have some conscripts move up onto an objective very quickly, then maybe pop this and take cover, so your opponent is going to have a real nightmare scraping them off if they want to try and retake that objective. With these supplements, there's usually around about 3 Warlord traits and 3 or 4 relics. We've had 2 of them shown off in the Warhammer Community Preview, one of them being the relic power sword of Lucas Baston, a previous guard character that you could use in games in previous editions of the Codex. In any case, now you can gift his sword to one of your commanders. It's basically a relic power sword that gives you strength +2, so strength 5, AP -3 and flat damage 2, and also a fairly helpful leadership aura that allows Cadian infantry within 6 inches not to take any modifiers to combat attrition. Usually I'd be a little bit sniffy of leadership upgrades like that, but out of any of the armies I think that Guard are one of the higher ones of falling foul of leadership. The relic itself is a decent enough buff to combat, and if you got it in the middle of an infantry formation, it might well prevent a few morale casualties along the way as well. Again, seems like it could be pretty nice to accompany a squad of white shields up the board as well. I don't think it's anywhere near quite on the same value as the Relic of Lost Cadia myself, but certainly seems like it could have use in the right list. Finally, we have the Gifted Commander Warlord trait, which allows guard units to redeploy once they've seen the enemy deployment and they know who has first turn. Wherever these tend to pop up, they tend to be pretty reasonable choices, as it basically helps you to win the deployment minigame, keep your fragile units safe from the enemy's first turn alpha strike, and maybe try and get better positioning to do the same for them. This one's maybe a touch on the weaker side out of them. If you want to use it for vehicle units, you can only redeploy 1 Cadian vehicle unit, or up to 3 Cadian non-vehicle units. I feel like one of the better uses might be to try and keep a vital tank commander safe, or maybe reposition something vital like a manticore that the opponent has managed to get line of sight to. I feel like perhaps redeploying infantry won't have quite the same amount of effect, but I guess you get to do that with quite a few more units if it makes sense. Could also potentially be a way to get several units into strategic reserve for cheap. Depending on whether or not there's other stratagems to allow multiple Warlord traits to be taken, Guard Warlord traits do tend to be a bit stretched right now. In normal armies you can only have the one, and there's already quite good options available such as Old Grudges for some artillery rerolls against a key unit, or just to get another full payload manticore from a tank case ability. A few of these supplements have allowed some extra Warlord traits to be taken though. I think there's one for the Tyranids, so fingers crossed they might give one of those options to the Guard as well. It certainly would be helpful. So overall, some fun little buffs for the Cadians there. I don't think we're seeing anything game-breaking that's going to take them right to the top of the tournament scene, but certainly new rules and options can only be a good thing. I think that White Shields plus that Relic Sword do seem to give some really good incentives to actually using conscripts instead of standard guardsmen. In any case, let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'll certainly review these rules in full once we have them, hopefully in the next week or so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel and you'd like to help support, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics has a Patreon page, and you can find it down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the channel's monthly prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits every month. If any of that sounds good, or you'd just like to help support, feel free to give a look down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.